If you've ever struggled with finding the time and right process to grow your Etsy print-on-demand shop, or if you're not sure how to maximize the time you do have, welcome to part 4 of the video series where we change all of that. Today's time block is all about batching mockups from all the designs that we made in parts 2 and 3. I'll show you my process for creating mockup templates in Canva to make the process more efficient, and I'll also show you my hack for making lightning fast listing videos right in Canva. In case you're just joining, in this 8-part series, I'm walking you through how I spend my time in what I call time blocks and the very intentional activities or batches that I accomplish in each time block in order to grow my shop not only quickly, but effectively, including researching trends, demand, and keywords, then using that research as the basis for designs, including design batching, using a couple of different methods in our previous videos, then getting all of those designs into mockups that we'll tackle today. Then we'll create the products together in Printify in the next video, then finalize those in Etsy listings, and then at the end I'll also give you a peek into my customer service process and my strategies for avoiding overwhelm in all of it. If you're new to my channel, this is going to be a game changer in your Etsy growth workflow. It's the same workflow I've used for years to grow my shop to multiple 6 figures. And if you've been with me for a while and saw the original version of this series, this is going to be a reboot with a completely new niche, new design inspiration, and updated processes to reflect the many changes that have occurred since the last edition in 2023. So if you haven't already, make sure you tap the subscribe button and have notifications turned on so that you don't miss out on any of the episodes. In case we haven't met yet, my name is Mandy, founder of Simply Thrive, a one-of-a-kind membership for print-on-demand sellers with a more holistic approach and intentional blend of strategy, mindset, and action to help you confidently tackle your goals, overcome challenges, and stay consistent despite all those shiny objects out there. I'm also a busy boy mom, an active top 1% seller on Etsy, and have generated over $1 million in revenue as an online business owner, primarily with both handmade and print-on-demand businesses. I've spent years growing these, and so now I'm here with one simple mission, and that is to provide you with strategies to simplify the journey so that you can stop the overwhelm and start thriving in your own online business. Now, if you haven't seen the first few videos in this series, definitely go back and check them out because the research and design that we did in the previous videos directly influences the work that we're going to be doing in this one. Before we dive in, I wanted to share some insights on mockups in general as an Etsy print-on-demand seller. Depending on your products, there are a variety of options for mockups and places that you can get them. Your print provider will typically have some, however, I don't recommend them for Etsy simply because statistically they just don't convert as well with Etsy shoppers. Placeit is another option. I use them a fair amount for non-apparel items because they have certain products that are all over print for things like blankets and some home decor that match pretty well with products from Printify. I don't use them for apparel though, since in most cases they don't quite fit the typical trending Etsy vibe, and the apparel mockups aren't often accurate representations of the final real product, which is more important for apparel than anything else. Instead, my favorite option for most mockups is Etsy sellers directly. There are tons of options available from some other great sellers. If you're on a budget, look for shops that have bundles or listings where you can get access to their entire shop for a good price. One thing you'll want to watch out for are AI mockups. For apparel in particular, I do not want to see you using AI mockups. I don't care how well it fits your aesthetic or looks okay. Don't do it. I take a very strong stance on this. And while Etsy does allow you to use mockups for your images, the seller handbook expects listing photos to be an accurate representation of the final product. AI has come a long way, but for clothing in particular, AI mockups don't quite get the seams right. Sometimes the neckline is all wrong, and different brands have a clear and distinct look to them. For example, Comfort Colors t-shirts have a tighter neckline, and the dyeing method creates a unique style for most of their colored shirts. When you aren't providing your customers with an accurate representation of what they're going to get, you open yourself up to complaints and negative reviews. If you're looking for a recommendation, MOCKUPS by Little Feather is one of my personal favorites. Michelle, the owner, does a phenomenal job on creating mockups that are not only aesthetically pleasing and fit so many trend styles on Etsy, but she also does her best to make sure that the mockups are accurate representations of the product, which is critical for, again, avoiding customer issues and is the number one problem typically associated with using the alternative AI versions. I personally have Michelle's whole shop bundle that I have paid for myself. And to be honest, this is coming from someone who definitely has a mockup purchasing addiction. There's actually a running joke in my membership group that there are a large number of us that have a serious addiction to buying mockups. But I will say that getting a really good whole shop bundle like this has really helped to curb that habit, because I can almost always find a really great mockup from a selection like this without having to go search for or buy new ones. Michelle also adds new ones frequently and just has a really great eye for capturing a trendy aesthetic. It's an upfront investment, but it has saved me a ton of money in the long run. But more importantly, my listings with her mockups convert really well too. I will link Michelle's shop in the description, as well as a discount code that she's so graciously provided for my audience to use. I also wanted to mention that she runs a Facebook group with other Etsy sellers with real people, real product mockup shops. It's a great resource to stay connected to because she regularly updates a running list of shops. So if her aesthetic doesn't quite fit what you're looking for, but you still want to make sure you're buying from a shop that is making accurate mockups, you've got options here. And so I will link that Facebook group for you as well. Once you have your set of mockups, it's time to head to Canva and get organized. When I am working with mockups, I create different mockup templates for each of the brands or different types of products that I offer. I mostly work with apparel, so that's what we'll be looking at here, but I also have mockup templates for totes that I sell, for mugs that I sell. Right now I'm doing Comfort Colors t-shirts, but I also sell other brands like Gildan 18,000 sweatshirts. So I create a separate mockup template for each of them so that I have all of the mockups that I'm regularly using in one place in a template that's ready to go and work with. If you don't have something like that created, I just start with a 2700 by 2200 canvas, and you can do that simply in Canva by setting it to 2700 by 2200. This is almost a 4:3 ratio, and what Etsy says right now, they've gone back and forth over the years between square and 4:3 like it used to be, is basically they state that your listing photos should be able to accommodate both no matter how it's cropped. I found that by starting with just a square listing photo ended up resulting in too much information and too much of the design and image getting cropped. Whereas I find that if I'm working with this not quite square, not quite rectangle size, fewer parts of the image are cropped. So as long as I'm working with this size and I don't have anything important over off to the immediate left and right borders, it works really well. So that is the size that I use. And so I start with that. I've got mockups uploaded into Canva here, so you can see all of those. And whenever I'm creating a new mockup template, or if I'm adding a new color to this template, I simply grab it from my upload, drag it over, and then let it go. Now, if you have a photo from a mockup seller that is maybe more vertical than horizontal, like this one, you'll notice that when I drop it, it kind of centers it. And so if you simply double click on that image and adjust it, you can now move it. So I typically will have it right around there in terms of seeing a little bit of the head, but not chopping off too much of the bottom. Kind of just centers where I know that design is going to land. And then I repeat that process for all of the mockups with this brand that I want to have. Again, these are all of my comfort colors, 1717. If we look at a grid view, you can see all the different colors that I have in this particular template. So I like to have a front, a back, and a flat lay. You can also sometimes have duo images if you're doing a group. These are common for bachelorette. So sometimes I will have some versions of those from different mockup sellers. And then you can see I just have them grouped by the colors that they correspond with. And again, when I'm working in batches, remember, I'm focusing on one niche, one product type at a time in order to make this super efficient. This type of process where you are creating these separate templates for your different products will work for most other types of products that you might be selling, not just t-shirts, but also, like I said, sweatshirts. You can do this for mugs, totes, ornaments, wall art, pretty much any type of product where you're not doing an all over print. It'll work for anything where the mock-up image has a front-facing view like this one, where you can see the very front of that product very clearly. If you know you're going to have designs in your batch that are slightly different, perhaps you've got a double print area style where you've got a design on the front pocket and the back, or if you're working with sweatshirts, you might have a front print and a sleeve print. I typically try to have at least a couple templates built and ready for that as well. Sometimes I will incorporate them here in this brand batch, or sometimes if I'm doing a lot of that type of style, I might even create a separate template where it's just sleeve print style mockups, or just front and back kind of pre-built templates that I've got ready to go for that particular style. For front and back designs, you can either buy them pre-made. A lot of times you'll see collages, like this one is 2 front images, but sometimes you'll see where the model is facing the front on one side and turned around on the other half of it. It just depends. There's a lot of variety out there. Or if you have a front mock-up and a back mock-up, you can create your own like I've done here. And it's very simple to do. So you can see in this one, I've added a frame and added it to this existing image. So if I were to do that here, I can simply duplicate this because I still want to retain a back image in this template file. So I'm going to duplicate that. And if I come over to elements and just type in frame, and I just want to use the circle. You can use any shape. I tend to like either circle or oval sometimes if it's a smaller area. And then I'm going to either grab the front design up here, or if I've got it easily available in my uploads, I can scroll through. And just like I did with the full image, I'm just going to drop it in. Now, because I want to have this close up for the pocket, I'll double click on the photo. And now I'm going to stretch it and expand it so that that pocket area is more visible. And if I really want to make sure this stands out in my photo, I can add a border here, give it a little bit of thickness, and then I will often change it to white. And so that will allow me to have almost like this picture-in-picture effect, and I can move it around as well. So sometimes it'll depend on your back photo. If you have that here, you might need to adjust it. So it's nice to be able to have this separate where you can just kind of shuffle it around if you need to. And if it's covering up too much of the image behind it, you can simply expand that and adjust it. So now you can see just by doing that, it's a little bit more to the right. So when I drop a design in here, it's It'll probably cover up a little bit of the design on the corner if it's large, but I can adjust that when I get to dropping in the design. But this creates a nice template to have in here with the rest of my mockups. And like I said, you can do that for all the different colors that you may want to include. Once I have all of my colors in here, you can see that I also add in a size chart. I might also add in care instructions. And essentially in this template, I'm adding in any other listing photo image that I might want to include as part of my listings. Some people put coupon codes in there as an extra listing photo. You could include a color chart. Some people like to include their social media handles for their business, but at a minimum, you'll want a size chart in here in addition to your mockups. One note I want to make on color charts. They are great if you are offering a ton of color options or if you don't have an actual mockup of every color that you offer. I generally stick to offering no more than typically 6 to 7 color options, and I do this for a couple of reasons. Number one, I prefer to have a mockup of each color option in my listing photos. Buyer conversion rates are statistically higher when they can see the design on the actual item they want to purchase, which brings me to reason number 2, which is when I get to the listing phase in Etsy, I match the listing photo mockups to the color in the variations so that when a buyer selects a color from the drop-down list on the listing, it will switch over and show them the corresponding listing picture. And number 3, there is a psychological phenomenon referred to as decision fatigue or a paradox of choice, which basically just means that there's a potential for an overload of choices. This applies to a lot of things in life, but in retail and e-commerce, there have been multiple studies that show when a consumer is presented with too many options, it can result in them becoming so overwhelmed with the choice that they actually abandon the sale. Or they might say, oh, I'll think on it and come back later, and then totally forget about it. In either case, we want to reduce any potential friction like that and give that buyer every reason to make their purchase right then and there instead of creating a potential barrier to that sale. Once we have added in all the pages for this brand style that I want to have available for now, I'm going to do one more thing before I call this my template. First, you'll want to click on any of the photos that you have in here, on any of the pages that you've got in your batch of mockups. Head up to the top and look for the timer. Now, if your screen looks like mine and you don't see it, simply right-click on any of the images on your mockups and click on Set Image as Background. Now, click on the photo again and you'll see that the timer pops up. Click on that, change it to 1 second, and then apply to all pages, and then just click out of it. Why did I do that? You'll see my listing video trick at the end. But I'm doing it now to save that effect with the template so that when I copy this file and start creating a batch of mockups to use for my actual designs, that setting, that 1 second setting for each of these is retained. And I'll show you what that looks like once we've got a batch ready. So you can see I've got this saved up as a mockup, and instead of batch, I'm just going to name this a template. And this will be ready for our mockup batch. Once you have these templates created, you don't need to go through this step every single time, unless you're adding in new colors or if you've got some new mockups that you want to add to your template. Anytime you've got these set up, that's the whole point of having a template started, is that when you then come in to do a batch, you're copying that template and getting going. When you are ready to start working on your batch with your actual designs, you are going to come to the top and you are going to copy this file. Don't add your designs to the original template or start deleting mockups. quick pro tip, if you do accidentally make unintended changes to your mockup file, I've done it many times, I guarantee you will at some point too. If you have Canva Pro, you can simply go up to the file and then click on version history, and you can always revert back to a previous version if you need to. Once we've got our mockup file, the other thing I want to make sure I add in is all of our designs. Remember from our design batching that I saved them all together in one folder on my computer when I downloaded them as transparent files. This is also why I do my designing in batches based on similar niches and themes in one setting, so that when I export it, they're all already together in a folder. So all I need to do is simply drop them into Canva so that we can start adding them to our mockups. All of these little habits add up and result in helping you to be more efficient and organized without really having to think too hard about it or add in a lot of extra steps. And so then as I'm adding them into my mockup batches, I'm simply clicking on the design, and then I can proceed to start adjusting and adding them in from there. Before we get too far and start adding designs to all of our mockups, you'll notice that I've got 35 pages on this template. I don't need all of those for this design. So what I want to do is I want to look at it in grid view like this, and I'm going to delete any colors or styles that I'm not going to use for this design. I know you'll be tempted to use as many as you can. You want all of the colors, all of the options, but remember what we talked about before in terms of too many options. Keep it simplified, focus on fewer options, and prioritize colors that either go really well with the design or, more importantly, colors that we know are doing and performing really well in the marketplace. When we think of comfort colors, that is going to be things like moss, ivory, espresso. I've seen orchid doing well, which is this one. Violet's doing well. I've got several of these key colors in here that I know typically perform well. If you've got lots of options, simply go out and look at the marketplace and see which types of mockups and colors in comfort colors are performing well and tend to be best sellers. That will give you a good clue. In this one, for this first design, it's a darker design, right? It's that raccoon. So I'm probably not going to use things like pepper, for example, because it's going to be a lot harder to see. And I probably won't have them on espresso either. It's a larger design and I'm intending for it to take up a lot of space. So I don't need back designs and I don't need flat lays either, because those I typically reserve for more close-ups of the design itself. I'm going to skip moss. I'm going to skip berry here as well. We've got those. I don't need back designs, so I'm going to get rid of those. Don't need that one. And as I do this, I want to make sure that in total, I have no more than 10 pages in this mockup batch. Because remember, when we get to Etsy, I only have 10 photo spots that I can use. So I want to be able to export and upload everything all in one shot at the end. So that's why I have them all in one file like this. I'm going to start with these. As I go and get to the end of the design, I might decide which version of purple I want. There's orchid, but I also know that this violet is doing really well. So let's see how these look as we actually create them. So remember, I simply clicked on the image, which dropped it over here into my file, and now I'm going to place it. The first thing I'm going to do as I'm placing things is I lower the transparency. For t-shirts and especially light colors, generally around 85 is pretty good in terms of transparency. If I were designing for sweatshirts, think like Gildan 18,000 sweatshirts, for example, where there's a polyester blend and the ink absorbed a little bit more, which means the colors are dulled a little bit more for direct-to-garment printing. I want to have that transparency and opacity even lower. Oftentimes, if I'm designing on like black sweatshirts, for example, that transparency is going to be closer to typically around like 70%. So it makes it much more muted. Again, why do we do this? Because if you're using print on demand and making apparel like this, it's all going to be done with that direct to garment process, which means color absorbs into the fabric a little bit more. It doesn't just sit on top like vinyl, for example, which means, again, those colors are going to be more muted in person when a customer receives it. So if you have your mock-up design set way too bright and vivid, then you are going to get customer complaints because that's not how that shirt is going to arrive to them. I have a whole other video on direct garment printing and setting customer expectations. It's a little bit older, but it is still very much accurate. So I will link that for you in the description. Once you got your transparency set on the first one, I went with right around 85% for this one. Then you can simply Control C and Control V. So I'm just doing a copy paste. Depending on the mockup, sometimes you have to do very little adjustment as you go. So that one looks pretty good. We'll go to the next one, paste it. You can see this mockup, I need to expand it just a little bit for the design so that it's consistent in terms of sizing with the rest of the mockups. But that looks really good. I like that coloring. Paste it again here, and I'm just doing Control V on my Mac to paste it every single time. And we'll adjust it. You'll notice that this mock-up is slightly tilted with the model, so I adjusted accordingly at a slight angle with the design so that it, again, kind of matches that angle of the person standing in the picture. Paste it in again for this one. That looks about right. Maybe just ever so slightly turn that, expand it. Come down. I really like that on the orchid. Let's see how it looks on violet when we get there. Expand that just a little bit and one more. You know, I really like this on the violet too, so I'm just going to keep it on the violet. I like that color combination. That works well. So now you can see we've now placed that in all of, I don't know, like 30, 40 seconds. That design, once I got going, very, very quickly. I'm going to now save this file as 30 feral raccoon. And I'm just going to say comfort colors so I know which one that is. I'm going to export the entire file by going to download. Now for listing photos, normally when we're doing designs and exporting designs, we're using PNG so that we can have that transparent background. For the purposes of listing photos, I recommend exporting as JPEGs, and that is because that will ensure that you still get a good resolution because we've got the sizing right. But JPEGs are smaller files, which means they take up less space. Number one, that's good news for your computer. But number two, that's also going to make the upload process when we get to Etsy so much faster. We won't have to wait for it to load forever. So I'm just going to do JPEGs. Quality for the large is fine. If you want to expand it out to 100, that's fine. I don't really notice a whole lot of difference for the purposes of Etsy. You can see our size here. That's all good. I'm not doing anything else. I'm simply downloading it. Now, it's going to, when it saves, it's going to save it as a zip file on your computer. So I'm going to save it. And then what that's going to do is, like I said, creating a zip file. Now on my computer, I simply click on that zip file and it's going to open it so that I can now see all of my mockups from that batch in one file. If you're on a different computer, if you're on a Windows, you might have to right click on that zip file that's saved and extract them. But either way, you will be able to get to an actual folder that has your listing photos in it for that batch, which means then I'm going to take one more step. Remember I said I had a listing video trick that I promised. Remember, we set up our original template with that 1 second length, which means all of that is retained in every single batch that we create. So we have 8 pages on here. Every page is 1 second, so that's 8 seconds, right? So with me, we're going to go up to share, download again, but this time instead of a JPEG, we want to come down to MP4 video. And we want all the pages together. We don't want to click on this separate files. We want them all together in one file. So now I'm going to click download one more time. It's going to save that as an MP4 video. Now, if you want to save yourself one extra step, here's the next thing that I do with it. When my computer prompts me to save this file, instead of just saving it anywhere again in my download folder, I'm going to go back into that folder that I opened after I zipped everything and then unzipped it. We've got our folder in here, right, of all of our photos. I'm going to save this MP4 video there in that folder with all of the other mock-up photos for this design. This will be clear when we actually get to the Etsy listing photo side of things. However, I want to show you is that now by doing that, by taking just that extra second up front to save everything together, now when I get to Etsy, all of the listing photos and the video are together in one folder for this single design. So then when I get to Etsy, I'm simply uploading the whole thing in one shot. It's super, super fast. So we'll see that more in action when we get to that one. But again, this is our time block specifically for mockups, which means we're going to repeat this process for each of our designs that we have for this batch. And I want to show you in real time just how fast this starts to go by simply getting really fast and repeating again the same process over and over and over again. That is in and of itself the magic of batching and staying in one place the whole time. You're not bouncing around between different systems. You're not going back and forth. You're not adding in extra clicks. You're simply repeating the same set of processes over and over and over again in a way where you're leveraging templates and again, using that simplified method. If you have designs in your batch that are slightly different, for example, let's say you have some embroidery designs that you did in your batch, or perhaps you've got a double print area style, like we have one in here that's going to be a front and back style. I typically save those for the end since it is a couple extra steps and we'll need to make sure we bring in those other slightly different mock-ups. So for now, I tend to kind of think about my designs in groups, even though I'm doing all of them in one batch. I'm going to start with ones where I'm going to use the same mock-up colors probably in this case, and then I'll probably do the set of dark shirts. So we've got some that are white text, for example. Those will have a separate batch where I'm going to select the darker comfort colors, and each time we're simply going to repeat the process. So now I'm ready to start the next batch. So I'm going to do File, Make a Copy, because this time I'm simply using the same mockups again. I'm going to use the same ones that I already picked. So let's do this one. This should work out really well. So I'm going to slide this over. Now remember when we were doing our designs, I intentionally set them up regardless of whether I was creating them in Canva or Kindle. I set them up to be the same dimension for the design itself, that 5,000 by 5,000. So now you can see that intentional step early on now means that when I'm sliding these in, it's retaining that size of each one. So I'm not having to resize and do a whole lot of fussing along the way. If you have a design where you might need to make it a little bit bigger, you could. This one is actually pretty close to where I would want it. And so like I said, you might make a couple little adjustments here. I'm not saying that every single one you won't have to touch, but it's a good starting place. And so you can see now this one is pretty much ready to go. And so I'm going to save this one. This will be our chapter 30, comfort colors. And now we're going to export, download, JPEG, all of them, save. For this one, I want it in my download folder, not in the raccoon one that I saved. So I'm just going to make sure I have my download folder saved. So it's going to create another zip file. And when that saves, I'm going to make sure I open it so that it's ready. I can see all of my mockups are in there. So I can go up, download, repeat. I'm going to do the video this time, save it. Just like with the raccoon one, now I have my chapter 30 folder, so I can save my video in there, and the next one is done. We'll go up to File, make a copy, and we'll do another one. Come back to our uploads. Let's go to this one next. That should be a pretty similar structure. This one I want to make sure I expand it a bit because otherwise that text will be pretty tiny. So just make a slight little adjustment there. But again, all of our transparency, because I'm just sliding this over top of that original one, it's retaining. If I click on this transparency, it's retaining that original 85% that we set up in that very first one. So again, it's just simple little things that just make this process go so much faster along the way. This one, I really like that color combo, so that looks good. Like I said, depending on your design, you might have to make small adjustments, but for the most part, it's going to be very smooth to add in each of your subsequent designs once you've done this the first time and kind of set up your baseline template. Do this color. Now this one, I am worried that that black text might get a little lost. That's actually not too bad, so we'll keep that. I think that looks pretty good. I know that this violet color is really popping up a lot, so I wanted to make sure I had a version of that in here. That is another one. We'll save it. We'll just call it Denim Bow 30s, cover colors, share, download, JPEG. Again, it'll prompt me for where I want the download saved, so I just want to make sure it's in my main download folder. Save it. I'm going to unzip that file so that I've got a separate folder, and then I'll come back up here and do my video, and then we'll make sure we save it in that design folder with the other photos. And now we're ready for the next one. And again, you can see just really how fast these start to go once you've got that kind of initial rhythm, once you've got really everything set up as that template, everything else starts to go so much faster. So then for this next one, let's see what this coloring looks like. That actually works pretty well. I'm going to shrink that. I like that this is taking up a lot of space. That was very intentional to make those letters very large. So we'll do that one. That works pretty well, I think. You can see this one, I'm having to do very little adjustment on this one. Go through each of the colors. These are all looking good with these colors so far. I actually really like how that one looks. Because we've got an outline on there, these are working on the lighter colors as well. That one really stands out nicely, so I like that one. We've got a couple more spots. So what I think I might do is maybe instead of, we're at 8 pages. So let's do, I duplicated that page. Now, I'm wanting to add a color in here. So I have all of my mockups handy off to the left. If you created your template and that was a while ago, you're probably not going to have all of your mockups just handy off to the side for you. So if needed, this is the point where I would have this open, and if needed, simply copy and paste over here. And this is because I'm wanting to add in another color here, right? When we created this design, I intentionally added that white border so that we would have a design that really pops and stands out. Like, I really like how this one looks on a darker color. So I might even go in and swap out a couple of these just to really have that nice pop. So I really like this berry color. And so I think that stands out really nicely. And so I'm just going to adjust that here. And again, I just saved right over that one. Again, if you don't have your mockups off to the side, that is why I keep this mockup tab open, because it's easy enough to simply grab the design that you want, copy and paste it over. And I'll show you. So if we go here, the last one that I want to bring over is an espresso, just because we know that color is performing really well. So I'm going to grab my espresso mockup. I'm going to duplicate this page and just paste it right in there. Now, if it pastes over it like that, all you need to do is click on replace background, and that's it. Pops it right to the back. And it retains our timer up here as well. So then I just need to adjust this slightly and make sure my design is centered, and that looks really good. So now if we go to grid view, you can kind of see where we're at in terms of all of our colors. And we are now at 10 pages. And I think I'm good with these colors. It gives almost a split between lighter and darker. So it'll give me a chance to see which ones work. What you could also do with something like this, if you do have a lot of colors that you really want to test out, or if you've got a design that's going to work well on multiple colors, one option is to create two separate listings. One would be to create a version or use a version of the design that works well on lighter colors and have that as one batch, and then have a separate one for all of your darker colored shirts. For example, your peppers, your mosses, your navies, all of those, right? That is certainly one option that could work really well also, without creating that overwhelm, right, for the customer, because now you've created them as separate listings and you can ultimately see which ones perform better by having them as separate listings, almost like doing A/B testing in that sense. So we've got these, this looks good. So now I'm going to do Dirty 30 color letters, just so I know which one this is. Share, download, and we'll download that as our JPEG. And now you can see we've got 10 pages. So this will be perfect for our listing photos. Save this in my download folder, just like I did previously. Go back to download, MP4, download, and then that'll go in the same folder. Open up our color letters, save the video there. And now we're ready for the next one. So I like this one because now I'm going to do the darker version of this. So I'm going to use the same one and make a copy from here and repeat the process. So this one has that darker color. So I'm going to slide that over. That actually looks really nice by having that darker image in the background. So I like that. Do the same here. That one worked out really well for that color. This is one where we weren't quite sure. That actually should work pretty well on this Pepper Comfort colors, because this is kind of that washed out charcoal gray. So it'll be almost like that monochromatic style that is performing very well in the marketplace, and that Dirty Martini really pops on the design. So that is perfect. I like that. Bring this one over. This one stands out enough, I think, on the pink. So that works out okay. We might swap it for a moss at some point. We'll see how the rest of these look. That one works out well. That one we might swap out because that might get a little lost in the design. Let's see how these last couple look. I think the one I'm going to swap out is this ivory. It looks pretty good with it, but that martini glass will get a little lost. So instead, I'm going to swap it with a darker color, and let's use this moss. I think that will work really well, and it's fitting with that green lettering that we have for the dirty part of the martini there. So we'll get it placed. I'm generally kind of eyeballing 3 to 4 inches down from that neckline and nice and centered. So that looks good. We've got 10 mock-ups that have all been updated. So now we've got another one, Dirty 30. We'll call this one black letters so we know which one it is. Share, download JPEG. Make sure this one saves in its own folder. So we'll save it. Make sure I unzip that before I then go up and export the video. Save our video in our black letters folder and go to the next one. I want to make sure I'm grabbing all of these. So I'm going to save this one, which is a front and back design. I'll save that for the end. I've got these smaller minimalist ones, which I know are hard to see at the moment, that I will do separately at the end because I'm going to use flatlays for those. I'll explain why. This one, I remember, was our duo pairing listing. So we'll save that. I want to make sure I go back and get this one. So I'm going to grab one of my versions that had ivory in it so that I can grab that. This one had white and ivory, so that should work out well. So I'm just going to make a copy of that one, and we'll make sure we'll get our collage in here. This one is the right sizing because these doodle collages, I always make sure those are nice and filled. We want those to take up a lot of space. This is another one where we might have something on the back of a shirt. So if you're looking at wanting to create a different variation and try out a different option, try a listing that has a full collage on it like this on the back of the shirt, and then do a front pocket design that could say, in this case, 1995 or something different, as a way to, again, add value, try something different, and create something new with a design that you've already started. So again, it's trying out different things and not being afraid to experiment with different variations. That looks cute. I'm not going to do red on blue. That will clash. Again, not every color is going to look good with every design and vice versa. Same thing with green. Like if you have your design and you bring it over and you're like, I'm not really feeling that color combo, don't add it. You don't have to. That is the whole purpose of going through and doing these mock-ups first before we even get into creating the product, because when you're creating them here, you can get a better sense of what it's going to look like before you go to the whole trouble of making the whole product itself and getting on Etsy, only to realize when you do the mock-up, like, I'm not really loving that color. So this is a way to kind of get all of that figured out before you finalize everything. And I know that that color is not really going to work very great there either. So this one we'll probably just do on a few different colors. This particular design style I almost always see on white or even ivory, so I'm okay with that. Now, the thing about having fewer color options like this is I'm going to adjust my timer on this one, and I'm just going to change it to 1.5. I don't want it to be too long because the whole point of having it be 1 second is that it triggers movement on the search screen. That is why I do it. We want that movement to happen because that's what helps to draw the customer and catch their attention to look at your listing instead of somebody else's, which might just be a static image. But I'm going to extend that timer just a little bit, just so that it's a little bit longer for the purposes of getting it uploaded to Etsy. Because then now, if each of these slides is 1.5 seconds and we've got 4 slides, that means this is going to be about 6 seconds long. And again, you could add in other listing photos here or other photo blocks that have information about your store, about your brand, about your policies, about care instructions. There are other things that you could be adding in here, again, that can absolutely be part of your template. I do personally tend to prioritize having more mockups than anything else because, again, I want customers to really be able to see and visualize what they're getting. And so that's why I try to fill up those spaces with actual images of the design on the mockup. So with this one, that one is short and sweet, so we can go ahead and export that one. This one we didn't name it, so I'm just going to do doodle collage 30s and just name that here. Make sure we're in the download folder. Save it, and I'm going to just name it real quick. And so now we can do our video. Save that. Find our doodle file. Save that, and that one's ready. Now what I have left is a large front design, a front and back design, our duo listing, which will be more like a group listing, and then 2 minimalist styles that I want to use on flatlays. Let's start with this one, and I'm going to, this has our darker colors in it as a starting place, so I'm just going to copy this one as a starting place, go back to our uploads, and I'm going to do this one first. So that one turned out really well. And again, we want this to be a large front design to coincide with that trend. And then just go right down the list. We'll get all of our dark colors situated. I don't want this lighter color because you'll notice if we bring this over, it kind of gets lost a little bit. And the blossom color and some of the other colors I know can get really light. So I want to make sure that the design isn't completely lost with that one. So we'll skip those really light colors. That works well. This one should work pretty well too. The bay color is pretty light, but I think in this case, it's dark enough to work okay. This moss color should work well, so that is good. Just making sure that's nice and large. Orchid, that one works pretty well too. And again, it'll be light, but should still be a little more visible. I just know that blossom color is pretty light in many cases, so that one just made me a little bit more nervous. But this one should be okay. That looks good. So this is going to be limited edition 95 comfort colors. Do another save. And we are almost done with our batch. Get this saved in its own folder started. Open that up to unzip it and download our video. Save that in our limited edition folder so they're all in there together. Now I'm going to take this one, and then our 30AF one is another light one. So I'm going to take this batch, make a copy, go back to our uploads, and now because we made that first one nice and large, you kind of see how I'm strategically adding these one at a time based on where I can leverage previous versions that I've done. And again, over time, you'll kind of have that rhythm and incorporate that into your process so that you can move a lot faster and more efficiently. And it's just every little thing like that just really starts to add up in terms of the steps you're taking as you go through this process. It's all just little things here and there and little shortcuts here and there that just make that process so much faster. I really like how that one turned out. I think that's going to be a really good design. You can see I'm adjusting this because this design went a little higher, so I want to make sure it wasn't overlapping on the necklace. It's visible in some of these mock-ups. So that looks pretty good too. I actually like the lighter color on that. That actually works pretty well. And again, some of these are a little bit lighter, but I think the design actually works okay in that regard. And generally when I'm picking the first listing photo, like that main thumbnail, I'm generally picking the ones where they highlight the design the best. So for example, in this case, my first photo on this one on Etsy is probably going to be this one. Number one, we know it matches with the other mock-ups that we saw originally that were trending, that this was originally based off of. So again, we're following those little clues, and we can see once we've got it on the mock-up, it really just makes that design pop. So that makes sense. So it's little things like that along the way where you'll just be able to start to pay attention and really leverage those small little details that can make a difference as you go. So I'm going to save this one as 30AF. Cover colors. Save that one. Repeat our usual process. Save our folder as a zip. Unzip it so that we can save our video. And then we'll get that one saved in its folder. Now we have just a few left. So the next ones I'm going to do, I think, are going to be this duo one. And for the most part, we can still use several of our designs that we have or several of our existing mockups that we have. So what I'm going to do is probably a combination of some of these. So I'm going to start with this one. So let's make a copy first. And remember, we've got one design like this. It's going to be lighter. And so I'm going to fill that out in a few of these as we go. And the other one that we have is what's going to go on our duo. So I'm going to go back to this one and I'm going to grab this one. So I've got a different mock-up where it's actually shown together. And I did that on purpose because we saw, remember when we were doing our research, that a lot of these kind of duo type of designs where it's intended for a group, where there might be some different variations depending on who it is, where we want to be able to show both in the mock-up. So I'm bringing in the darker design and I'm placing it on the ivory color here. I'm going to make sure I lower this down to 85, just like, oops, just like our other one. And you could just, oops, you can type this in if you want to. We'll adjust it so that we've got these pretty similar in size. So that looks pretty good. And so this will probably be my main listing photo just because we know from our research that that's what converted really well. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. But for the rest of my listing photos, I don't need to go out and buy a ton of mock-ups with this other style. I can still use these other variations to do that. So let's see what other colors I had in this one. I don't think I'm going to do this one because I'd have to do the brown, darker one on that one. I want to make sure I have a separate ivory one. I also want to make sure I have probably a light pink one and a white one. So we'll do some adjusting here. So I'm going to go back to my template here. I'm going to grab white and I'm going to bring that in here. And so with our white, I can bring this over so I can actually see my design. Minor adjustment there. And now with that design there, I'm going to grab the additional ivory. So we'll just do a copy paste there. Replace background if needed. That looks good. So now remember, when I get to Etsy, I want to be able to link these individual listing photos, these individual mock-ups, individual product colors to that drop-down list when I get there. So that's why I'm intentionally creating a separate photo for these different colors so that I have them. So you can see this was shown as a duo, but when I get to Etsy, I'm going to select this one for espresso and I'll select this one for ivory. I want to make sure I change the rest of these. Instead of blue for this one, might bring in pink. So let's do pink and see what that looks like. I think I'll do that maybe instead of, I'm gonna go with the darker violet in this case. So I'm gonna swap out this orchid. This one will work well for the darker color, I think. Yes, that works. So that'll be a good visual on that one. And then we need to change out these other two. So for the blue, I'm gonna bring over the ivory design. That works well. Same thing for moss will be on the lighter one. Perfect. One of these is white, one of these is ivory, so that's good. And then this one will have the light color also. So that works out well. We are actually over our count. So I think I'm going to, just with the design, I feel like these colors work really well, and that blue works really well with that kind of country western style. So I'm actually going to get rid of the purple. I'm going to get rid of the violet and keep these colors. And I think that will give us a good selection. So I'm going to saddle in up 30s comfort colors. So we'll save these. And again, if we decide that we wanted to test this listing or test this design, we might have a separate listing where maybe instead of a duo as our primary listing photo, we might have one that is maybe the pepper color instead. So it gives us the ability to experiment a little bit if we choose to. And we're not limited just because we can't have more than 10 in here. There's still plenty of ways that we can test that out and work within that. So we'll get this all saved, add our video to the folder. So now, if we look at our designs, we have a front and back design left, and we have our two minimalist designs left. So what I'm going to do for these, and you could close out of all of these if you wanted to, I'm just leaving them open in case I need to refer back to them in this batch. But in this case, I'm going to come back to this one, and I want my front and back options, and I might even need to make a couple more. So we'll do our front and back design next. So for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of our original one because I'm going to start with slightly different mock-ups. So I for sure want our front and back designs for each of these that I already have pre-built because that'll make it quick and easy. And then this design is kind of a lighter color. It's got the background, it's got the border on it for white. So that'll work really well for these. And even if you don't have a front and back version for every single color, that's fine. I typically will then grab, like in this case, what I know is going to go on the back. I'll use the back version of a color that I do have, and that's perfectly fine. I'll do the same thing for this violet, and I might even do a front version only just to show the color of this orchid. That gets me up to 7. I'll have my listing guide, that's 8. And again, as I'm looking at these and choosing almost kind of like a menu from my available mock-ups, it makes it easy for me to just kind of look at this and play around with it and see what I want to do. I think our pink will show up well on ivory. So let's do an ivory version as well. That gets us up to 9. And I'm going to do a bay color as well. I think that'll be fine. So then once I've got those, I can get rid of the rest and we can start adding. So just like we did before, I'm adding everything in. It'll be, again, slightly different this time because now we are working with slightly different mock-ups. So I'm not reusing everything I had before. Lowering my transparency, and you can see I've got this layer in here with that front. So all I'm going to do is right click, layer, send backward, and now you can see it's made that adjustment for me. For the front side, I'm going to add that in, lower the transparency. And here's where you have to be a little bit careful. So if I were to just try and drag this in, it's going to try and replace that. So instead, I just bring it really close before it does that. I'm going to shrink it down to about where I need it. So I will hold down the Shift key just to kind of get it in place. And then if I just need a little bit of movement, I can adjust it from there. A little tweaking, get that right on the pocket. I'm generally eyeballing the side of the neckline, so the outer edge of the collar. I want this just kind of right below that with the center part of the design. And if you can just kind of imagine the armpit over here, it's right in line with that. So that looks pretty good. Now what I can do is if I've got several mock-ups that are very similar, maybe not exact, but very similar, I'm going to select this one, hold down my Shift key, select the other design. I'm gonna do Control Copy, and then I'm gonna do Control Paste. You can see it's not exact, but it's pretty dang close. So again, minor adjustment here if needed. On this darker pepper color, I'm gonna lower that transparency just a little bit more because you can see it really stands out a little too vividly if I'm not careful. I'm gonna adjust this slightly to get it to fit. And again, this will be a back design. So I'll adjust that here to really fill up that space and send it backward if we need to. Go to the next one, do Control V again to paste that in. Adjust this where we need to. And again, notice this kind of almost got a little bit of a sports style to it, kind of like a jersey. And so that really fits in well with the styles that we're seeing. So we're just going to adjust these as we go. And this would work well if you've got several designs you've done in a row that have a front and back style, because again, you could kind of group some of these together and reuse it once you have this initial placement. And even if I'm doing batches down the road, if I know that I've done a design style that has a front and a back with either similar colors, or if I know I'm going to need similar mock-ups, I'll start with those. So if I come back down the road and decide, you know, I'm going to do maybe a 21st birthday style, I'm not going to go through the process of copying my template and re-adding all these again. I'm going to start with this one and just copy it and go from there and drag in my design. That's why I like working in Canva, because then I can see previous versions that I've done and I can reuse them when it makes sense to. And I think this color actually turned out pretty well on ivory. It will take on almost a slightly more girlish look to it just because it's got that lighter pink. So I think that works well. So now we're down into just our singles. So instead of copying both, I just need this one. And so these will just show the back. And that is perfectly fine too, as long as you have clear mock-ups in your other photos that show exactly what that customer's going to get. That will be fine. But again, it gives us the opportunity to show those additional colors, and that is the goal. Expand that one out because it's a bigger size. We've got a front one in that case, so I just need the 1995 in this case on that one. Slight adjustment there. Again, it just gives the customer an idea of what to expect with each of them. And notice that I'm bringing it down and copying it from the version above that already has the transparency in place. Again, that's just one little extra step that I don't have to go and do. Instead of clicking on it from over here, adjusting the size and adjusting the transparency, Again, it's one of those, just it's 1 or 2 less clicks and that will add up. So that looks good. So we've got our 10 pages. They're all updated. That looks perfect. We'll do Club 30 comfort colors, share, download, save that one off, and we're almost done. Save this in our download folder, so we'll have it for later. Unzip that so that we can save our video in there. Save our Club 30 in the Club 30 folder. Okay, so now the last 2 designs that we have are our minimalist designs. So remember, these were tiny little front designs that we created based on the trends we were seeing. Now, if you recall back to our trends and our research, most of these were being done on flat lay images. And I tend to do the same when I've got these really small designs like that, because this will ensure that you can get close enough in that listing photo to see what that design is. Because if that design is way too small in the mock-up, you're going to have a lot of customers clicking on that listing to just see what it is. And if they're not checking out from that and they're simply clicking on just to see it visually, but not then buying, that can drive down the conversion of that listing. So keep that in mind. And I do, like I said, these tiny little designs that are small, that are minimalist in nature, I do tend to use flatlays for those, even though my general preference is to use more lifestyle model mock-ups like these most of the time. So for these last 2, I'm going to start with another copy of this original template because we do have some flatlays in here. So I'm going to make a copy, and this is why I keep a template file that has several options in it. I'll start with the pink design first. It's just a girl. So I'm going to get rid of some of these. I don't have in this file a flat lay for blue. So for this one, it won't be my main listing photo, but to show the color, I'll save this blue one. And then I've got flat lays for these others. So I'm going to use those, and we're just getting rid of all the ones that we don't need. So we've got 11 at the moment. I'm going to, for our purples, I'm going to keep this violet one, and I think I will drop this one. In some of our designs, depending on what it is, I might add it back, but we'll see. For now, I'm going to keep these 10. So we'll start with this first one, grab our design, and I'll start with the pink one. And again, this one might need a little bit of adjustment, and it's small, so we don't want this to be huge. If we think about the collar, I don't want this to extend beyond the size of that neckline. And so that's what I'm going to kind of use as my guide for this. I'm going to lower my transparency. I'm just going to type it in. That looks pretty good. And so now, just like before, I'm going to go right down the list and get these added in. Again, kind of using that little collar at the top as my general sizing. That looks good. And again, as you go through these, you'll notice that when the mock-up is similar, I'm not having to do a whole lot. So this one's a little hard to read. So I'm going to hold off on Bay, I think, for this pink color. That looks better on the moss. So again, if you can kind of visualize, this is about 3 to 4 inches down from the collar in real life. So that placement looks pretty good. And again, I'm using that neckline as my guide as I go. And we'll just continue this process just like before, right down the list. This one will look really good just because it's on a darker color, so that will make it really stand out nicely. Perfect. espresso, we know that's gonna look good. Enlarge it just a little bit. Perfect. And then that one. That looks really good. So this is going to be just a girl, and I'm just gonna add 30s so I remember what it is. Cover colors, and get that one saved off. Create a folder again, and then get this going. Save our video in our folder. Then we just have one more left. So I'm going to start with this one and make a copy. Now, white on white, we know is not going to work. So this is where I'm going to swap out and bring that bay color back in, which I really like and I actually feel like is on the verge of being similar to Etsy's color of the year, which is lime cream. This is obviously a little bit more subdued, but I think it's a really great color. So now we're just going to swap it with that white image, and that actually works really perfectly. Now this one is a little bit longer, so it'll extend a little bit beyond the collar compared to the last one, but that's okay. This looks about right. It's probably about an inch or so beyond the collar on each side. So that should be pretty good. I'm just gonna raise it up just a little bit so it's not super low, because again, you want to envision it's kind of in the top center chest area. So we'll copy that one, bring it down, paste it. Need to shrink that just a little bit. And again, if this were our main listing photo, this would be really tiny and hard to see. A customer would have no idea what this says. So just out of curiosity, they would be clicking into it. And if it's not what they think they expected it to be, then they're going to click back out of it and go back to scrolling. So this is where you want to be careful and make sure that you're really thinking about that first listing photo and making sure that it's appropriately sized for what the item is. I try to make sure it's visible and that someone can tell that, you know, it's a shirt of some kind. If it's on a model, I like to make sure that the arms are visible in that first listing photo so that they can clearly see if it's a t-shirt or a sweatshirt. And so little things like that can make a difference. Now this one, I'm going to drop our ivory color because there's no way that the white color is going to be visible. So that one is not necessary. And so since I had this one nice and placed, I've just been doing a copy and paste right down the line. Certainly, again, just like before, it's easy enough to bring this over. And again, it's going to retain that sizing pretty darn well. So I can do that for these last couple just to show you. And you can see very simple and fast to bring that over. So that's it. That is our very last one. And again, you can see how much closer that design is to the eye of someone scrolling compared to how small this will be. So that's why for these small tiny designs, I always use flatlays for those, just so that a customer is not clicking in more than necessary to drive down that conversion on the listing. So for this one, I'm just going to do Dirty 30 Era, because remember we already have Dirty 30 and some of our other design names. So this is our Dirty 30 Era, comfort colors, and we'll save everything one last time. Save this in its own folder, get our MP4 video going for the last time on this batch. Grab our Dirty 30 Era version, save it, and so now just like that, we have 12 sets of mock-ups for all 12 of our design batches. Even though we design these in different places, we've now brought it all together as their own separate batches for mockups. And every folder that we have saved on our computer has a set of listing photos and their matching listing videos for all 12 of these designs. Now that we've got all of our mockups ready, they're all going to be sitting and waiting for me to get to that final stage of publishing on Etsy so that the products are ready to sell. But before that happens, we need to create the products in Printify first. So make sure that you're subscribed and stick around for the next video in this time blocking series so that you can see how I do it. I hope that this has been helpful for you. If you want to learn more about my strategies for thriving in your print-on-demand business, make sure you've got the notifications turned on for my channel so that you don't miss out on any of my upcoming free content. And in the meantime, stay focused, my friends, keep taking action, and never stop pursuing excellence in your business. Thanks for watching. I'm so glad you're here, and I'll see you in the next one.